Okay, we've done that. So just a quick
All right.
intro to Ben before I turn him over. So I met Ben a few months ago in one of the Cunavian training where he was a facilitator, and he did such an excellent job. Nothing to do with Wardley Maps. That was my first introduction to him. And so I learned a lot from his facilitation techniques then. And then I found that he is very active in the Wardley Mapping community. He does run a weekly Wednesday community of practice calls every Wednesday, and I jump into those as much as I can every week to participate and put on your thinking hat and make sense of this and see how this can be used. And while I started doing that, I thought we should bring him over to our meetup group to present him to other audience to open their minds to the tools and technique and the excellent work that he is doing. So that's why Ben is here today. And so take it off, Ben. It's all
Yeah,
yours.
thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Ben Mosior, and I run learnwardleymapping.com. And it's a website that is about learning Wardley mapping, as you might imagine. And there's all sorts of questions we'll kind of dive into, like what is Wardley mapping? Why would you use it? How do you do it? That kind of thing. And we'll actually run you through the process on a problem that matters to you today, to get you oriented to it, not just so you learn the theory, but so you actually have a practical experience with it. And to sort of start us off, though, I want to ground us in some of the reality of what we're going through every day, what we're dealing with at work, and how this method might be useful. And we'll kind of like explore that a little bit here in a bit. So to start us off, Srikanth, I was wondering if you could set us up with maybe 3 breakout rooms and just divide folks randomly. There's a discussion prompt I want to pose to you all, which is, what is a difficult project or task that you're currently working on? What is something that is posing quite a challenge for you in your work? And in the breakout rooms, introduce yourselves to each other. And Srikanth, maybe let's take about 5 to 10 minutes and just give folks a chance to introduce themselves to each other and to talk about the difficult project or tasks that they're working on at the moment. Is that prompt clear to everyone? Does that make sense?
Okay, I have broken up people into 3 rooms, and
What's up,
if you
David?
Just to further your instruction there, should we be talking about a problem, let's say team evolution could be a problem, or creating IoT devices is a problem? Is there one of those that might be better suited for this?
I'd say whichever one you care about most.
Thanks. Okay.
Yeah, if that helps.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, Srikanth.
No problem. You wanted 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, that sounds good. So 5 minutes just to introduce yourselves, make that part pretty quick, like 15 seconds each. And then go around and share the difficult projects or tasks that you each are working on. And just as an FYI, the breakout rooms, Zoom cannot record breakout room conversations. So when you come back, the recording will pick back up. So for those listening at home, sorry, you're gonna miss the fun part. But think about this in the meantime while we're waiting.
Sure. So I'm going to send you off to the breakout rooms. If you have any challenges, you can leave the room or you can send me on the chat, and we should be able to help you with that. Thank you. Dave, the group, thanks for joining. We have some breakout sessions going on. Would you like to join one of the groups? I can assign you to it.
Sure, I can't be on for too long, but that'd be great. And I just joined, so
No
I'll have to
problem.
catch up to your...
I'm just seeing how I can add you to a breakout room. There you are. I just put you in room number 3. You can join the conversation there. You will get an accept on the screen if you accept it. Hi, Nurul. Welcome to the call.
Hello.
The folks are all in breakout rooms. We'll be joining very shortly.
Okay, thank you.
There they come.
Cool. Looks like we're all coming back.
Yeah.
Anybody have a really good vent session? Very cool. All right. Let's see. So do we have everyone back? Looks like maybe
Yeah,
so.
we have.
Cool. So yeah, so this is I asked you to think about a difficult project or task because I find that toy examples when learning a new theory or a new approach to understanding something just doesn't hit the right kind of like value for folks. And so it helps to have a problem in mind as we're learning what we learned today. And we'll actually get to play with that problem with this new technique that we're going to learn called Wardley Mapping. So very cool. So now, as a second part to this, there might be some dead air here because I might give you a couple seconds to think about the answer to this question. But I'm gonna share a prompt on the screen, and I'd like you to consider the project or task that you just discussed, the difficult, challenge that you're dealing with today at work, and I want you to think about what the blanks might contain. This is usually a very difficult challenge. So I'm going to give you about 15 seconds just to read this through and think about it real quick. Okay, so I am doing this project or task, right? In order for us, our company or our team, right, to be able to do X, which will enable the organization to Y. Was there anyone here who found answers to these quite easily? Was like immediately able to fill in the blanks?
Yes, Ben.
I love it. Awesome. Are they things you can share?
Yes. So I'm doing a compliance project in order for us to meet our stakeholders' requirement, which will enable the organization to avoid penalties from regulators.
Awesome. That is like an amazing example to use here. And what I'll say too is that like for most people, this is really hard to know the answer to. And so I'm glad that we have an example of it too. But the reason that this is so hard is because oftentimes we have conflicting priorities at work. We have an undefined strategy. One of the most common problems for folks in middle management or folks who are doing things like agile coaching is, they do have a role that's been defined and they certainly have a job description. But the question is every day is, how does it fit into the bigger picture, right? If you're tackling a team's problems, helping them understand how to move forward, what is that going to enable the organization to do? And sometimes that's really clear, which is like great because I love Siva being able to point out something so clear, but a lot of times it's not. So out of curiosity, like how many people here have less clarity maybe on how everything connects together? At least a couple of you, yeah. So this is definitely the challenge that we're here to talk about today. So we're here to learn Wardley Mapping, and Wardley Mapping is a free technique for thinking about concerns of strategy and basically helping to answer that question. How do you fill in those blanks in a way that's meaningful? And it's provided courtesy of Simon Wardley, who's a nice old man who lives in a swamp in the UK. He's delightful. You should meet him sometime. And Map Camp is coming up in October. So there will be a conference in the near future about this as well. The method is Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike, which means anyone can use it. It's free to learn. And there's a book online. You just have to go to learnwardleymapping.com to find a link to the book. Today, we will be using this method to explore that difficult problem or that project or task that we were talking about. And in order to do so, I'm going to ask you to do some drawing. So if you don't already have something to draw with, some pencil and paper, might be a good time to go run and find something to help with that. So in brief, Wardley mapping is three basic things. It's a visualization system. Like how do we think about systems visually? And also how those systems change. How do we visualize that change? It's also a body of research that Simon Wardley conducted about capitalism, in particular, how things change, how they, their characteristics, how they change over time as they're subjected to the pressures of supply and demand competition. And he basically created a theory that articulates 4 stages of evolution that basically anything under the forces of capitalism goes through, from genesis to custom built to product and rental services to commodity and utility services. And so that's the body of research. And then the third thing that Wardley mapping is a strategic framework for thinking about and making better decisions. It's a way to understand these patterns and then take advantage of them in order to produce better futures for our organization and for humans writ large. Wardley mapping is useful for like architectural questions. It's useful for social movements. It's useful for just even getting a handle on simple projects, right? And it doesn't really matter so much as long as you can model it in terms of its parts. And we'll talk more about that in a moment.
Hey,
this
Ben,
is Wardley mapping.
Ben,
Yeah, hey.
quick question. Just quickly tell us, like, what was your encounter with Wardley mapping? And how did you happen to become get into this stuff?
Totally, yeah. So the way I got into it was I was on a configuration management team for an enterprise company that did pharmacy software. And one of the things we were responsible for was making sure that we could ship the software. And unfortunately, like a lot of times, over the last 10 years, it's kind of like one of those things where like whenever you're successful, you start to build up kind of legacy, right? Legacy is a sign of success, right? A lot of people have complaints about legacy, and for good reason, but it's a sign that we succeeded in the past. And so that's something to be honored. The problem is it makes new decisions hard sometimes because they're past commitments that are coming into the present moment. And so we were dealing with that quite a bit. And we had this moment where like we were doing things like managing servers to run the build system so that the software could get delivered to customers and all this kind of stuff. And our managers came to us and said, hey, we've got a couple $1,000s here, something like, I think it was like $10,000 or $20,000 that we could use to buy servers. So we could get new hardware in our data center that we have on site. It's like, okay, all right. We weren't expecting this. Like this wasn't part of an annual budget cycle or anything. And so we were like, how do we decide whether to say yes or no to this request? Because whenever you say yes to something like that, it's a commitment. You have to follow through on that commitment, and you have to have a plan for many, many years out, what's going to happen over the full life cycle of a purchase like that. So we were thinking about how to make this decision. We encountered Simon Wardley on Twitter, as one does. And he was saying some smart things. And we're like, we feel like he's someone who would have an answer to this. And so we went and read his book, and we locked ourselves into a conference room for about 2 weeks on end and tried to learn Wardley mapping, tried to make a map like the one that I have on the screen here. And it was a brutal process. It was really hard. But we did finally make it work. We were like, oh, this is how it is. This is how it works. And well, to be frank, to cut that long story short, we realized that we didn't have a strategy. Like we thought we understood what having a strategy meant. We thought we understood what being intentional about our responsibilities, what that looked like. And in the process of making a map, we realized how wrong we were. That's the long and the short of it. So the moment for us was really coming away from that, going, oh no, we don't have a strategy. Now what do we need to do in order to be intentional from here on forward?
When you say we, right? We meaning who and how many?
Yeah, it was a small team, like a couple of us, and we had a pretty good like reporting structure up. We had one manager and then a director level who was basically helping us and helping us get these funds. And so we ended up writing a strategy in a report form, and then but we wrote it by making maps, by thinking about the system using Wardley mapping in order to come up with the right answer, what the strategy should be. Long story, and by the way, like just to sort of like tell you what happened, we said no. We said no to the server purchase because we realized we were not responsible enough as a small organization to take on that responsibility, and to we were not going to be the ones to revitalize the local data center. It was a mess, actually. So that was part of what tied into that decision. But making a map to articulate that helped us become intentional about it and help us realize what the full extent of that commitment was going to be. Yeah.
One final question, I'll stop after this. Which is that was the use of this tool, was it just your idea, or was it idea of a team per se, or because even the choice of a tool is loaded, right? I mean, it's based on an individual. So.
And to be completely blunt, oftentimes I advise people when they make Wardley maps. And I know I'm talking about the thing and I haven't shown you the thing yet. But like when I talk to people about Wardley maps, I often have them start out by keeping it pretty close to the chest and just like doing it for yourself. So you don't need to coordinate the decision of what tool to use. Like you just do it for yourself in order to make better decisions. And then gradually you can expand it out, like show it to one person, be like, hey, take a look at this. And that's the way through this. And in our case, we had a pretty autonomous group of people. Like there were two of us that were primarily making this decision. And so it was just the two of us with like a hunch and could go off to the conference room. So we didn't need a lot of like the rest of the organization didn't respect this method at all, which is why at the end of the day, we used it to make a better decision. However, the report that we wrote was in a language that was accessible to the rest of the organization that didn't focus on Wardley mapping as a thing. So that's kind of like one of the secrets there. Yes,
thank you,
Srikanth.
Yeah, as always, the thing is much of problems can be solved with various tools. So it's hugely contextual and how we use the tool. So we have to as a Cunevan practitioner, for me, context always matters first, and then in the context of what problem we are trying to solve, there might be several options to solve it with different types of approaches. So
100%.
This is something that I challenge Ben in the community of practice. People try to solve a variety of things with Wardley maps, and I sit there and think, I wouldn't use a Wardley map for this. I would use X or Y or Z. It's a bias. So if we have a hammer around,
exactly.
we want to use it for everything.
Absolutely, yeah. And I am I try not to be too guilty of that. Like Wardley mapping is just a tool, but I want you to judge for yourself whether or not it works for you, whether or not it's useful. And so to sort of start us on that path, I've had this image up on the screen, and so I want to pose a question to you all. And feel free to use the chat if you'd prefer to use the chat, but also feel free to just unmute yourself and shout things out. The question is, what meaning is conveyed by this image? There are at least 5 different types of meaning. So I'm wondering if we could kind of get a list going here. Any thoughts? What do you notice? Yeah, go ahead.
While most of the things about making a cup of tea commodity, when it is actually made, it could be a product, and then it's quite possible that you can make it into something. That's my takeaway for this.
All right. So I heard you were pointing at the sort of x-axis position. The sort of conveying the meaning of how evolved things are. Like, is it in Genesis? Is it custom built? Is it product and rental services or commodity and utility services? And I like that you're like, well, it says that it's in commodity, but it could be over here. Like that's a great kind of thing to point out. Yeah. But like, what do you see on this image? Like besides the x-axis, what other kinds of meaning do you see? Just posing this to the group. Oh dear, Srikanth, I think you're looping again.
Mike is acting up again.
Yeah. So at the top, what you see, business and public. What do you think those are in the system?
Looks like maybe you're trying to make a decision whether to have this a public service or a private service.
Oh, that's interesting.
The
Yeah.
service of delivering a cup of tea, and then you've broken down the elements to deliver the cup of tea.
Well spotted. Yeah. So there's like the people who are consuming the value at the top, the users.
Right.
And then you identify that there are parts of a system and also how they're all connected, right? How do they all come together in order to produce the value for those users? Yeah, well spotted. Yeah, so this is a Wardley map, and it tries to take a visual approach to representing what's going on inside a work system. And this super simple example of a cup of tea, is just one example. Like, you can model pretty complex systems, especially ones that are more oriented around work rather than just like mechanical parts. And we'll get some practice with that. And the other thing about Wardley mapping is there's a process surrounding it. Like, making the map is about 5% of the overall potential value. The real like value is having the artifact, having the map in front of you, and then being able to talk about it with other people or with yourself, frankly, and interrogate it in certain ways in order to find meaning that you didn't know existed. And so there's a whole series of 5 factors that Simon Wardley talks about. We're not going to get into the jargon today. We're just going to actually do it. And then you'll kind of look back and go be like, oh yeah, I did that. So we'll give you the sort of like practical experience around this. So there's this quote from a book titled Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. Has anyone read that here by chance? Ah, yes, Srikanth. It's a really interesting book. If you're ever interested in like questions of how to be intentional or how to do strategy. And it basically says that having conflicting goals, or basically just any sort of unconnected target or incompatible interests, is a luxury. It's not something that an organization could justify as being good strategy. And I'll argue that from the work that I've done in enterprises, this is the default state. I think in most organizations, there is usually an abundance of conflict in terms of the goals and the intentions. And this is really hard because it means that when we're doing work on the ground, when we're working with teams and when we're making decisions about how to best unblock them and how to help them prioritize and manage all that, like even the questions of like in our group, we were talking about maturity. Like, how do you help teams make decisions about what skills to improve if you don't know what capabilities the organizations need, because you don't know what the strategy is? And that's where the filling in the blank parts becomes pretty challenging, I think. So the question that I've had about all this is like, how did we get here? Like, how did we get to the point where in most of our organizations, it's more common for things to be unintentional than intentional? And I've been thinking about this, and I think, I've heard Simon Wardley say things that like most executives make decisions by gut feel. And certainly in the consulting engagements that I've been in, I haven't seen much in the way to sort of disprove that, which is a little bit of a disappointment. But here we are. We're humans making human decisions, right? So I think intuition is perhaps one of the dominant decision-making patterns, or even just feelings, right? Whatever feels good to someone, whatever makes them feel secure, they'll take that pathway by default, unless they have another heuristic or rule of thumb to help guide their decision making. And it's a really like efficient way to make decisions, right? Because it's fast. Like, it's just so quick. All you have to do is like, oh, how does this feel? How does that option feel? Okay, I'm going to do the thing that feels better. Okay, boom. And it's a decision-making process that lasts less than a second, right? Whereas sometimes you can slow down just ever so slightly and rely on rules of thumb. Like, 80% of people in my field do this approach for this problem, so I'll do that too, right? And those are rules of thumb. Sometimes they're validated, sometimes they're not validated. Sometimes they're just guesses that we've all decided that this is the way it's going to work, and we haven't exactly validated it, but it's a rule of thumb that we can apply, and so we do that. Sometimes we copy others in this way. But then on the extreme other end of the spectrum, so we've done the short, quick kind of versions of decision making. On the other end of the spectrum, we have like extreme thinking, like brute force analysis. And this way of making decisions is really slow. It can take so long. Analysis paralysis is what we hear about with this kind of thing a lot of the time. out of curiosity, like just a quick show of hands, like how many of you tend to hear more complaints about analysis paralysis? We've got a couple of you, okay. How many of you think maybe decisions are made too quickly without enough thought? Okay, so this is going to be fun because what we're going to talk about is how to slow down the decisions just enough to cause something called disfluency. Has anyone heard of disfluency before? Okay, so we've heard fluency probably. Like maybe some of you have heard of Arlo Belshie's agile fluency model. It's super fascinating if you've never seen it before, but like it's really interesting. It's not about maturity so much as like what things should we be like well versed in order to enable other kind of capabilities further down the line. It's really a fun kind of little visualization of agile skills and capabilities. So fluency being this idea of like ease or difficulty associated with completing a mental task. And if something's easy or fluent, then you can use those intuitions, you can use those rules of thumb to like make those decisions. But if the task is perceived as being more difficult, then you'll kind of do this more effortful and analytic processing. You'll slow down. And so the question becomes, if people are making decisions too quickly, how can you slow down the thought process just enough for them to engage more thoughtfully, more fully with the question at hand, right? Solutioning is a version of this. Like whenever people are just throwing solutions out, right? It's far better to focus on what the problem is and define that first, because that's going to last. That definition of that problem is going to last for quite some time. But solutions may or may not work, and so you might have to try a bunch of them. So the investing in the problem is really helpful. But one of the things we can do in order to help us slow down just enough is to make models of the world. And Russ Akoff, in this paper that he wrote in 1962, says that models are idealized in the sense that they are less complicated than reality. And so that means that they're easier to use for research purposes because we can carry them about in our heads. We can actually fit them into our brains instead of like the brute force analysis version of this, which is like, what are all the parts, every single one? What are all the possibilities, every single one? Like you can't, humans have bounded rationality. We can't actually fit all that stuff in our brains. So the question becomes models, like how do they shortcut things? Well, they leave information out. They bring you down just to the relevant properties. So for example, on a road map, you don't have vegetation typically because vegetation is not relevant to navigation unless it's in the road. That's a different problem. So thinking about model making.
Yeah, so models are essentially what you call patterns. Humans are pattern matchers and models are just patterns. That it's a simple way of putting it, right? So it helps us make sense of the world using that as a pattern. So model becomes.
Yeah, and what I want to be able to give us the chance to do a little bit of is becoming model makers. Like how can we grasp this power in order to make sense of the world around us for ourselves? And so that's what we're going to start by with your pencil and paper. We're going to actually practice some model making. And we're going to start with 2 toy examples, just to sort of get a feel for what this is like. And then we're going to work on that project or task that we were discussing that is difficult, right? So we're going to actually practice a specific kind of thing, which is to divide things, to actually take them apart. And I always start with the humble pen. So I have a pen here, and it's a Pilot G2, good pen. And I'm sure you all have something similar probably nearby that you can use for reference if you'd like. But the task is to make a list and, or actually just first, like on the paper, right? Figure out, answer this question, who uses a pen? Just write down a name to refer to them by. Just write that down. Who uses a pen? Lots of different people use a pen, but pick one. And then the second thing I want you to do is make a list of the basic parts of a pen. So what are the basic parts of a pen? I'm gonna give you about 45 seconds here. And give me a thumbs up when you've got a basic list down. Okay, we've got about 15 seconds left. All right, got some thumbs up. Final thoughts down. Okay, I'm very curious. Who has a list that they could share? David, yeah.
Ink, quill.
Nice.
That was my second list. My first list was ink tube, the ballpoint, the barrel, like I didn't know what to call it, but the cylinder, and the cone, like that funnel part where you're close to your fingers.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. I love that you represented it in two different ways or two different kinds of pen kind of writing things. I also like that you made up names for the parts. That's actually a really important skill in this whole process, is like making up names for things, because you won't always be able to know the perfect like word for everything in the system that you're in. So being willing to take a bold guess is great. Who else had a list?
I could try. Go on, Shyam. I just had a few things to add to David's list. I had a pocket clip, so I added that. And I also had a switch mechanism, so I said the spring switch and on-off states. I put that in. That's essentially
Nice.
to what I got.
Nicely done. Yeah. So this is really great, because when we're working together on making a model of a pen, first of all, we're all making different assumptions, right, about which pen to model. We're also making different assumptions about which parts belong in a pen, which designs we think exist. And so it's useful to get that out onto paper so that we can talk about it and to notice when we're conflicting in that way. So great work. This is good. So the next prompt, this is where we ratchet up the difficulty a little bit. So the next one is a vehicle. So I'm gonna be pretty broad here. A vehicle. So the first thing is, who uses a vehicle? So make a note of that. Lots of different people use vehicles, but pick one. And then make a list of the basic parts of a vehicle. I'm gonna give you 60 seconds for this one. Just give me a thumbs up when you're good. Okay, about 15 seconds left. Get your final thoughts down. All right, and don't worry, perfection is not the object here. We're not trying to have the perfect comprehensive list. Quite the opposite, actually. We're trying to have enough on a list to have a good conversation, which is half the fun, right? Is identifying which parts are relevant or interesting to you. So who else, maybe someone who hasn't shared yet, has a list of their parts of their vehicle? Yeah, Ron.
Hi. I put wheels and tires, a cab, an engine, drivetrain, brakes, controls, seats, and safety features.
Nice. I like that too. The grouping of safety features, and that breaks down. If you look zoomed in on it, you could probably see a whole bunch of different things like airbags and ABS and like all that
Seat
kind of fun stuff.
belts and all that.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, seatbelts would have been the easier one. I forgot that they existed. Nicely done. Who else had a list? Yeah, Siva.
Had some, sorry, go ahead.
Or did I preempt you there? Sorry, who had one?
I think Gabriel had something. So
Got it.
you want to try? You're on mute, Gabriel.
Sure. I have doors, bumpers, body, seats, engine, muffler, wheels, tires, brakes, gas tank, headlights, mirrors, seatbelts, and cup holders.
Nice. Priorities. Yeah, this is great because does anybody know how many parts are in a car or a vehicle? Sorry, I shouldn't have said car.
I do.
How many?
Depends. A hybrid about 60,000, a non-hybrid between 30 to 40,000 parts, depending on
Okay.
how you count it.
How many of you had the full list out of curiosity of all 30 to 60,000 parts or what have you? Nobody was able to come up with all those lists. Yeah. So like, this is the fun of model making is we're actually like removing information from the system, and doing so deliberately. Like the safety features example is part of like exactly the case example of this. It's like you're trying to simplify a very broad set of things in order for us to be able to have a conversation about it. And I think where the detail belongs depends on what kinds of decisions you're making. So for example, if we're talking about a Toyota and perhaps a Toyota minivan, and we're talking about serving like middle-class families with kids in the United States, for example, then having cup holders is a very important part of the comfort discussion that comes along with that. And it's hard to know which way to go at first, like which things to include, which things to not include. But you get a feel for it as you start to make more and more models like this. So now we're going to ratchet up the difficulty again, and perhaps exponentially. So bear with me if this is really hard. Remember, we're not aiming for perfection. What I'm going to do is ask you to do the same thing with the difficult project or task that you've been working on. And I'm going to give you an example real quick. I'm going to use my family's COVID-19 health and safety. I think Srikanth has seen this example probably one too many times, but here we are. So this is my family is the user here. And the parts of that system are things like securing food, making sure we maintain shelter, that we employ practices like social distancing, that we have a social safety net. So people that we can rely on outside of our home who maybe are part of our common bubble, you know, from a safety standpoint. And also like an interesting one here, finding joy. That's a really important part of our health and safety. So that's my list as an example. And again, the user is my family. So now the challenge is, and I'm going to give you 2 whole minutes for this. Who benefits from that difficult task or project that you're working on? So that's the first thing. Who benefits from that? Who is being served? And then the second question is, what are the basic parts of that work? And start with the things that people are doing or how they do them. got a minute left. All right, get your final thoughts down. All right, and let's come back. How many of you found that super hard? Like I did when I was in that conference room way back. Got a couple of you, yeah. It is a hard thing to do for sure, because what I just asked you to summarize was not a mechanical thing, not a vehicle, not a pen. I asked you to summarize a complex thing. I asked you to summarize human behavior coming together in order to produce value in some way, right? Would anyone be comfortable sharing the difficult task or problem that they're working on? Ron, yeah.
I'm working with, I'm coaching a startup, and I'm working with a group of testers that have sort of come together, and they've been training each other how to do automated testing using Selenium. And,
cool.
Now they're trying to take what they have and create a product out of it. And so what I have in terms of like the who benefits would be the agile teams. Anyone who does testing, traditional QA testing, which is different than maybe testers,
yeah,
and stakeholders. And then actually I've been breaking down for this group the components and then asking them what are the real value drivers, and we're sort of evaluating it. So the components, a high-level summary, is the framework used to set up the automation. They have test examples because the best way is learning by doing. And so they give examples that can be copied and reused by anybody. They do provide some basic training, more like tutorials. They've actually created a pretty cool bot to automate the testing, which uses the commonality set up by the framework, right? And then the thing that I'm trying to convince them is that all those things are nice, but I think some of the power is really creating the community learning, or more of a community of practice, like best practice, right? And so that they can bring people together, because I think that's where the real value is bringing people together, maybe having the community contribute into delivering all the value items that we're above, as well as being in the community and then demonstrating, because then you can create credibility for your own testing skills for developing your career.
Yeah, nice. I love it. It's clear that you've done this kind of like componentization exercise before.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it. So yeah, this is actually a key thing to keep in mind. So few organizations get this far, right? So few are aware of their users and what they need, and so few have taken the time to break down the system in order to know what the parts of it are, in order to have intent, deliberate intent for each of those parts. So if you are at least paying attention to what each of those parts is doing, then you're ahead of 99% of organizations that are in play.
Yeah, the challenge that I'm facing is that these people are technologists. They've actually worked for me or with me over the years, and they came to me to ask for help. But they love to talk about the cool thing they developed versus what they have and why it's important for others. I'm trying to change their perspective a little bit. So it's kind of interesting.
Which has a number of problems, including like the if you build it, they will come mentality.
Right.
What often is missed is like they get focused on the consequences, the technology. Oh, wow. Right. But what are the conditions that are going to also be necessary in addition to the technology in order to produce the consequences that you're hoping for.
Right. So to answer your first question that you listed out when you put in that slide and fill in the blanks, then what I'm trying to do is, okay, stop, put your pens, put your fingers off keyboards. Now we need to do a demo to some customers to get some real customer feedback and members in the community, so then we can really understand the value, right? Because they just want to develop a whole bunch of stuff. So you guys are working too hard. Interesting.
Yeah. So this is going to be, I think, really interesting for you, and for everyone else who's like already made a list and they're not sure how or whether they've got the right parts down. Don't worry, it's actually going to be okay. If you only have 1 or 2 parts that make sense from here on, like you're in good shape. Like that's all that's necessary for us to get value out of today's work. So what we're going to focus on next is change. I'm going to say very bluntly, change is afoot. And we need to talk about how it affects your work, including all of the components that you included on that list. So what's next is the body of research that Simon Wardley has introduced to the world, this idea of evolution. So I'm going to show a few quick ideas here. So first is this pattern that everything that is under the influence of capitalism evolves. Everything that is under the influence of capitalism evolves from left to right, from Genesis to custom built, to product and rental services, to commodity and utility services. Nothing is safe from the power of capitalism, unfortunately. And the reason for that is because as long as there is a benefit to be gotten, someone will try to do it. Someone will try to get it. And so the aggregate effect of all the people out in the world who are trying to profit from making things better will result in even the most precious things that we think will never change eventually changing. And the alternative is if they don't change, they tend to die. They tend to decay and disappear. And so to elucidate this a little bit further, there are kind of 4 basic lenses to view that change through. So 4 stages and also 4 different ways to view each of those stages. So from left to right, you have each of the stages. From top to bottom, you have different kinds of ways to view those changes from one stage to the next. The top row is about like things people do. So there's the genesis of the thing, right? There's the custom building of the thing, and there are no two alike. And then eventually we try to introduce repeatability, and so we get products, right? And eventually those products become cheap enough to be like not quite cheap enough for everyone to own one, but pretty cheap so that we would rent one instead, right? And then over time, if the thing lasts long enough, it turns into a commodity or even a utility. And that's where you see things like power, right? Nobody wonders when they wake up every day where they're going to get their 120 volts, 60 hertz, what have you, power utility kind of thing, right? You're just going to plug it into the wall and you're going to get it. That's it. Whereas things like, jetpacks for people, like they're at least in the custom build stage. I've seen at least a couple interesting videos that tell me that someone has built one. And if someone else were to build one, it would not be the same. So it's more custom built. Similarly, there's these changes for practices, so novel to emerging, good and best. For data, from unmodeled to divergent to convergent to modeled. And then to knowledge as well, from concept to hypothesis to theory and accepted. Now, this may seem like a lot. I'm about to give you even more, and I apologize for that. The characteristics of these things also change. And I'm going to give you plenty of time with this table to actually sit with the list of parts that you've listed out for your project or task, and to think about how evolved each of these things is. And the way you'll be doing that is you'll kind of be reverse engineering how evolved each part is based on its characteristics. So for example, things in stage 1 have this kind of, look at this cool thing kind of vibe, right? We don't understand them at all. The market for them is completely unknown. And in fact, we're lucky if they work once and don't explode in a puff of smoke, right? Whereas in stage 4, it's completely the opposite, right? In stage 4, the market's mature. We completely understand how the thing works and how to use it, right? And furthermore, the failure never happens. It's very rare. And of course, there are stage 2 and 3 to sort of split the difference. But what you can do is you can sit with these parts and you can go, okay, which stage does it feel like this one is in? Okay, so let's try this real quick. So back to my example of my family's COVID-19 health and safety. I want to start with like finding joy at the bottom. When the pandemic looms, and given our ridiculous kind of sort of current state of the United States, at least, lucky you if you're not in the US, right now, the way we're thinking about how we live our lives is changing a lot, right? And so I felt like I had to reinvent the ways that I would find joy. And so I almost want to like treat it as if it's Genesis, and it's a completely new thing now, so that I have to reinvent new ways of doing something like finding joy. Whereas something like social distancing should be a fully accepted best practice in a pandemic sort of situation. So I came to that decision just by going through the list and seeing which one fits best, and really only spend like 10 seconds or so. Spend a little bit of time reading through the table, but then spend about 10 seconds per component. Like, don't spend too long. Make a best guess. It doesn't have to be right. It just has to be a tentative assumption, right? We can always talk about it and make it better later. So what I'm going to ask you to do next is, for each part of that project, for that task, what stage should each project be, should each part be in? And just write a little number next to it. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so I'll give you about a minute to do that. Just give me a thumbs up when you're done. We're at the 30-second mark, so 30 seconds left. These are real quick categorizations, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay, get your final thoughts down. Okay, does everyone have at least a couple parts categorized? Okay. Perfection, again, is not the object. If you have at least a couple of these parts with a number next to them, you have succeeded. So good work. What we're going to talk about next is a little bit of what to do with it once you've gotten this far. So we're going to convert this into a visual artifact, not just a list, but a visual, what I call a minimum viable Wardley map. Basically, we're going to cut out some of the more detailed and painful parts of mapping. We're just going to make a very quick and dirty sketch. And so find a new spot on your paper where you can do a little bit of sketching. And here, I'll share the screen again. So the first thing you want to do is you want to lay out our x-axis along the bottom. So just draw a quick line. And then once you've done that, divide the space above that x-axis using 3 lines into 4 separate sections. So 3 lines, 4 sections. Does that make sense? Okay. And if you'd like, you can label the 4 sections 1, 2, 3, and 4 underneath, just to note the evolutionary stages. Okay. So once you've got that figured out, pick one of the the users who benefits from the system that we identified at the beginning and put them above, somewhere above those spaces, above the map. So user at the top. And finally, this is just a quick kind of sorting exercise. You've already categorized each of the parts. Now you just need to draw them spatially into the right box. So this is just a quick sorting idea. So you've got your list of parts, right? With each one categorized into stages 1, 2, 3, or 4. Now you're just giving space meaning by putting them in stages 1, 2, 3, or 4 from left to right. And doesn't matter whether it's vertically ordered in a certain way. Don't worry about the vertical kind of layout. Just focus on horizontal. And let me know if I've lost anyone, because sometimes I go a little too fast.
Wouldn't we do it based on how far away it is from the user too, the way you build it? Or
that's let's save that problem for the end, because I think there's some trickiness there
yes,
that I don't want to get into.
The hand drawn makes it harder. Then I have to redraw, right? So if it is electronic, then I can just move it around.
Yeah, one of the things we say about making maps is you draw one and then you throw it out. If you draw one in order to get a basic understanding of what's going on, and then you can throw it away. So, okay. So if you're with us so far, you've sketched out a minimum viable map. Very nicely done, David. I like it. Yep, excellent. Nice, Ron. And Srikanth, nice. So you have just made a minimum viable map. Now, as you might have noticed, you haven't gotten any particularly amazing, incredible breakthrough as a result of doing this, right? Like all you've done is made a list, basically inventoried reality, which is valuable. Like making sure you know who you're serving, very important, okay? Knowing what parts of the system exist, very important. Also, so that you can have an intention for each of those parts, super important. And to understand the differences, like the fact that something in stage 1 is going to be different than stage 4, huge, helpful, but not incredible. So what we're going to do next is we're going to make this real. So just to sort of close this part out, this is the example of a minimum viable map for my COVID-19 family health and safety. As you can see, finding joy is on the left in stage 1, got social distancing on the right in stage 4. Just the same as you all have done on your pages. And if you wanted to take this to the next level, if you wanted to understand a more in-depth view of the system, what you could do is you could ask yourself how things are related, and you could ask about what depends on what else. And you might expand that map. Whoopsie, sorry about that. You might expand the map and say, okay, if my family depends on finding joy, what else is in the system that finding joy depends on? What are the underlying dependencies? And so you might have a couple layers like that where it's like, oh, right. Social distancing, provides direct value to the family, so does securing food. But securing food also depends on grocery delivery, etc. That's something that we'll save for another time. You don't need to do that to get the full value this first time, although it's a direction that you can take if you'd like to understand systems better. But, all right, I'm not going to do this or like bore you with this giant list. Don't read these words. I'm gonna hide the words. Okay, I'm gonna talk to you. So what we're gonna do now is we're going to engage in a thinking process. And this is what makes strategy real. It is the creation of intent based on the consideration of the conditions. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically ask the map some questions. And we're going to sit with the different parts of the map to see if these questions are relevant or whether they don't apply. And as we go along, we're going to see if there are opportunities that come up. Now, an opportunity is a new question that you have as a result of this exercise. It's a new space to explore, like a blind spot. Like, oh, we should know the answer to that, and we don't. That would be one example. It's a new conversation to have. Like, oh, I should go ask someone about this because they might not have considered that, etc. Or you might actually find an action that is immediately begging to be taken. So if you find yourself feeling an urge to act, that's also a potential outcome of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through a couple different patterns to use for engaging with the strategic thinking process with your minimum viable Wardley map. So the first pattern is the pattern of using appropriate methods. So this is from left to right. You've got Genesis, custom, product, and rental, and then commodity and utility. So you've got your stages of evolution. So one of the things Simon says is we should use the methods that are most appropriate for a given stage. And his assertion is that in stages 1 and 2, agile techniques tend to be really solid, things like XP, things like high iteration, and they're really helpful in those highly uncertain places, in those highly uncertain components, because the cost of change is low, right? You're building an assumption into the work that is, we're going to change direction when we learn new information. So agile techniques are really strong in stages 1 and 2. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, maybe for things that we expect to be the same all the time, like agile is great for like creating differentiation, right? Finding new value. Things that are the same, like power, we don't necessarily need agile teams for that, right? We would want something like Six Sigma because it's all about driving variation out of the system, something that you probably wouldn't want to have happen to your teams, right? So in the middle is this kind of gray area of transition where agile becomes less and less strong, still valuable, but less and less strong as we get progressively closer to commodity. And so lean techniques start to sort of fill the gaps. And that's why you see agile and lean together a lot, is because a lot of product work is the process of pulling something from Genesis into the product realm where you can make a bunch of money on it. So that's one prompt. And so on your map, you can ask yourself, where is your component? You know, if you look at the components that are on there, and which methods are strongest for that component, and are we applying the right method for that component given where it is? So that's one prompt. The next is reducing bias. And it's simply looking at a component and saying, how do we treat this thing? Do we treat it like a custom built thing when the rest of the world is treating it like a product? So how do we treat it versus how does the rest of the world treat it? And if there's a difference there, is that difference valuable or is it a waste of our energy? So that can prompt additional opportunities. Oftentimes success breeds inertia. We talked about legacy earlier. If we succeed, we will create inertia to change. We will create the systems that will resist change. And that's just the nature of the game. And so because resistance to change in an organization can cause harm to the organization in the long run, is there a component on your map where an overinvestment, an overcommitment to previously successful business models or previously successful ways of doing things is going to pose a threat? And so if you look through your map, you'll find opportunities like that. So there are a couple more of these. I'm not going to go through them all, but I'm going to leave this table up so that you can read through it. And I'm going to give you 5 full minutes. I know, wild, 5 full minutes of silence. And the process is look at your map, pick one of the components, and just run through the table and see if there are any opportunities. And then pick another component and run through the table to see if there are any opportunities. This will feel slow. That's okay. This may feel hard. That's even better. This stuff is hard. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes starting now. And please let me know if you have any questions. And about 2 minutes left. About 30 seconds left, and then we'll come back together. All right, get your final thoughts down. And let's come back. Okay. All right, that is the formal part of the program. For the rest of the time, I'd like to offer the chance for us to have some open discussion. And I don't have any particular commitment to how awesome this particular hammer is, but if you found something interesting, I'd like to hear about it. So how was that for you? Yeah, Ron.
Yeah, I'm the part that I mentioned about the community practice. I see going through down your list that there's a number of opportunities, but does that show that there's maybe more barriers to entry to move that one? If I choose to, should I move one with a narrow set of opportunities, or move something where, you know, because there's like bias to the way that QA is normally looked at versus testing. You know, some organizations today are looking to kill QA. And then thinking about testing, you know, everyone tests, but then taking an intentional approach to testing then where, you know, just do it seems to be more some of the mantra of the new thinking. It just sort of automating it requires commonality. So it starts going against, so there's these things that we're trying to balance, but, you know, other ones, you know, we can offer training, because training to use Selenium, like it's, okay, here's how you integrate. We can actually have some software cell, and then the team can make some movements by engaging the community to provide some training or tutorials, etc., before they go and create the community practice. Do you know what I mean? So do you go after the hard one? Like, is there an approach to determine where you start?
What's great about that is that, and I'm getting kind of chills hearing you describe these options, is part of the practice is to come up with those wheres. Like, should we make a move here or should we make a move here? How do I make the decision? And there are no like short and easy ways to make that decision, but there is, it's a focusing mechanism, right? Like you now know that like it's here or there. What's interesting is every component on a map can be exploded into its own map, right? It's like Wardley mapping is a fractal practice from the modeling standpoint. And so you could zero in on the community question and say, okay, I know that I could do all these things to make a community happen. I could add a community component to the map. All right. Even in doing so, what internal capabilities would I have to have as an organization in order to do that well? Right. If like, obviously excited people about the technology, like that's solid, right? Those people can form attractors for other people in the community. But what other components will you have to get good at? Well, you'll start going down the list and you'll be like, okay, well, what is the essence of a community? What are its parts? Like how do we go about cultivating each of those individual parts? And you'll find that, like, you might find that that's a challenge that you're willing to take on. You might also find that it's way too many parts to be responsible for, given the capacity that you have as the organization today. And so it's really a focusing mechanism at first for finding where to direct your attention in order to dig deeper, in order to then eventually make the decision about where to go.
Okay. So just based on what you're saying now, I'm sort of thinking in my head, and tell me if I'm crazy, because that's what I'm looking for. But there's two principal founders that I'm working with, and maybe what I'll do is I'll take them through similar steps to what we just did to map it out. Because I guess ultimately they're the founders, they're my customer, so I have to start where they are. So maybe that's the way to use this, and then they can sort of say, oh, based on, they know that they have bias, and then we right. But maybe we start where they're comfortable and then build out from their strength before we dive deeper and get more, like, take the agile approach to building that community practice, even with them, just sort of, gently step into it. Yeah. Makes sense.
One of the things to play with a little bit is, so we all know that we like to meet people where they are, right? We can't just like walk in and flip a switch and then transform the way that they think. And it's a similar problem here. So Wardley Mapping has a whole body of information around doctrine, which is how we conduct ourselves in our organizations. And so that might be an interesting place to start, is which doctrine do we do well? So do we focus on users, for example? Do we focus on their needs? How well do the founders understand those needs is like an interesting question, right? Because they might be overly focused on the technology and missing what it does for people, as an example of that. So there's a whole thing that I'll share there. Also, for everyone here, since we're getting close to the end here, and we can keep the conversation going for a bit, I'm going to post a link to the slides that we used today. Please steal these slides, use them as you see fit. They're licensed Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike. So all I ask is that if you do use them, please keep a link to learnwardleymapping.com in them somewhere. That, please, like, if you found this at all valuable, go right ahead and launch into this conversation with one or two other people and make a map together and see what you learn. Honestly, usually one of the first things that people learn is that they are all seeing this system differently, that they're all thinking about different users, different needs. They even think the system works in different ways. And so just even as a way of building shared vocabulary, just having the right words can be immensely helpful. Yeah. Hey, Rick.
Hey, man. So I think I really like the questions we were talking about, that Ron was talking about, and because I work with startups and companies too all the time, and tech people, and so what I really wanted to kind of zero in on is we have these initial prompts, which is who benefits, and then what are the basic parts, and we talk about what are the opportunities. But what you said earlier in the discussion is really talked about what are the needs, so who benefits, like, but what's their core needs? And it's like, we get focused on what's the problem we're trying to solve, but really is fundamentally there's an underserviced need that is why we're talking about this project, and really identifying those underserved needs and getting into where those are, regardless of this solution or thing you're working on. That where does that fit in? Where does it fit in?
It definitely fits in. What I will say is that Wardley Mapping is relatively unopinionated about how you explore user needs. Common methods that I've seen people use are things like user journeys, or just any sort of exploration. Like the value proposition canvas isn't all that bad for this kind of thing. But what I tend to use is a whole like different weird kind of methodology. The only thing that this methodology cares about is that you do focus on users and that you focus on their needs. Because the problem is if an organization exists just to make money, because then you'll make problematic decisions. And so the idea is to fulfill other people's needs and make money doing that. And so I think what you've pointed out is very important.
Yeah. So because I see that really with the initial prompts, and then we get into opportune prompts and things like that. But really, we talk about who benefits, and then we jump into the parts of the system and how they benefit. What's that core need we're serving or set of needs we're servicing? Isn't at all explicit in this map. So you need to, if that matters, and especially in startups, it does. The technical people, you need to find a different. What I'm hearing is you use a complementary method to make sure you don't lose sight of that.
Yeah, and actually, like part of what we lost today in doing this overly simplified version of it, which like does get you through the whole process, but you come out at the other end with like some parts missing, is that oftentimes in a full-blown Wardley map, you will include things like needs. And actually, you'll represent them as components at different times. Actually, I might be able to see if I can show you this goofy template that I've been playing with lately. Has not seen the outside of a client workshop. So let me see if I can find.
Yeah. So I think I like what you said. I've found some use of doing the value proposition canvas, which is a useful way of scaffolding people through that discussion. And I can see the opportunity. You could just take your Wardley map, if you have that, and basically put the user who benefits, and then actually draw the core needs that are serviced, and then put all your stuff down and draw the lines of these as you like. I mean, one of the things I saw you didn't touch in Wardley map is the vertical axis today,
right?
About how that connects to the user needs, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's
sort of,
where you could do the needs, and then you sort of see how these components, which of those needs, if they're visible, which needs do they address?
Yeah.
So
I love that you brought this up because so like this is I just like threw some stuff together in PowerPoint, right? So all I did was take your standard kind of like Wardley mapping axis along the bottom. So this is evolution for that table that we saw earlier. That's all that is. And then you've got the 4 stages, right? And then what I did was I kind of like stratified the map, almost like you would for a service blueprint in a weird way. And basically said, here are the user needs up top, here are the high level capabilities, and here are the supporting capabilities. So for example, one of the examples I love to do is like talking about my cats. So my cats, when I'm giving workshops, they decide that they need to be fed. And they'll start making sounds during the workshops and knocking over like my microphones and stuff like that, and making these demands. And so I can go here and think about, okay, is in stage 1, user needs tend to be gambles because we don't know whether or not it's valuable. In stage 2, they tend to be decent bets. They might still fail, but at the very least, there seems to be some kind of value here. In stage 3, it's more like user demands, like this is what we want, give it to us, please. And then stage 4 is the cost of doing business. Like it's not like special anymore. It's just, it's a must. And I suppose if I were thinking charitably about my cats, I would probably put them somewhere between user demands and the cost of doing business, because they don't need to be fed right now. That's not how the feeding schedule works, but they will certainly demand it. And then to sort of touch on the y-axis, like obviously I need to like buy cat food. And like perhaps at this point, cat food is almost like, yeah, I guess it's probably a commodity. So I'm just making up things. Like we might disagree about this, but there's like a separation protocol that happens because I have 2 cats. So I have to like keep them away from each other's food so the one doesn't get too overweight. So that's like a custom thing. And one of the funny things is like a client mentioned to me when they saw me do this, they were like, hey, you know that's not a custom thing anymore. They have a product for that, little microchipped collars that open up the dish for the right cat. And I was like, oh, okay. So now what we've done is we've just started having the initial benefit of a map. We're like, oh, separation protocol as a custom thing that I'm doing by hand versus separation protocol as a product thing that I do with a product. So anyway, the y-axis part of this is like visibility is the output of the chain of dependencies. Does that make sense? Might make sense in a second when I add these together. So cats depend on being fed. Being fed depends on cat food. Being fed also depends on the separation protocol. And for fun, I'll mention that the separation protocol depends on this thing down here, which I'm going to call doors. Rooms and doors. I have to keep the cats separated from each other, and that's how I do it. And doors are in every house, so I'm going to call them a commodity for the most part, right? Okay, so now you can ask the question, like, which of these components is more or less visible to the user, the cats? Doors are pretty visible to cats, but they're less visible than the separation protocol because the door is further down the chain of dependencies than the separation protocol itself. And I could go down like and make this more clear, like the cat does not care about the kind of tree that was harvested to produce the door. The cat does not care. It is so far down the chain of dependencies, the cat isn't even aware of the fact that it was a spruce or a fir or what have you. I don't know what kinds of trees are used to make doors. But so that's the visibility part of this. It's the outcome of the chain of dependencies, which we didn't talk too much about today, but that's kind of roughly the idea. Does that help a little bit, sort of fill in some blanks?
Yeah, that definitely helps, because I think without making the needs an explicit layer, you're actually encouraging people to skip it.
Yeah,
right?
and common practice before this was to just put the needs above and to ignore them. Or not to ignore them, but to just sort of have them hanging out with the user above the map, and so they weren't participating in the evolution part of this. But I think including them inside and thinking about them as gambles, decent bets, and so on helps keep them present. But you're absolutely right. You have to keep the user needs present and top of mind.
And by the way, those little cat chip collars, apparently they're the automatic cat doors, so your cats can go in and out without the raccoons coming in.
That too.
That's what they're invested. That's where they're invented. I have a friend that got them. And
oh wow, yeah. And
says,
so
yay, my cats are outdoor cats now, and I don't have to let them in and out.
Yeah, without the raccoons getting in. Yeah, and what you notice is that having a capability like microchip collars can become a platform if it supports multiple things on top of it. So if a microchip collar can support selective cat doors, and it can also support specific feeding bowls as a part of a separation protocol, now you have a minimum viable platform. You have a thing that supports two other things. And paying attention to that, I think, is helpful in these kinds of conversations. So yeah. So I know I've gone long-winded here. I'm 8 minutes over, I think. Any other thoughts or questions? Any other weird things that you found?
Hey, listen, I'm curious, man. What makes this tool so resonant with you? I mean, this looks like could be one of the many other coaching tools that you would use to clarify, why is this such a big hit? I'm just curious about it.
Yeah, it's hard to, originally the way that I would kind of think about problems by default was very analytical. So probably more towards the brute force end of the spectrum, as opposed to just the thinking or the feeling, like intuition based version. And so you would find me using tools like the logical thinking processes and just like any sort of diagramming kind of thing that was like really rigorous or really intensive. And that's what got me into it at first. What made me stay was the 95% of the things that are like not just making the map. Because the map is like not at all what's important here. Like it serves to provide a center for the conversation so that we can talk together about a system like feeding my cats, and we can share common vocabulary, and we can talk about what we agree or disagree about how the artifact is, as opposed to agreeing and disagreeing with each other just directly. But the value is in the thinking process that goes around it. And we've only scratched the surface. Those opportunity prompts are like hardly representative of what is available to us. So if you go to learnwardleymapping.com, there's a whole body of reference material that might be interesting to you. I have kind of like the same process that we went over as like quick reference down here. I kind of break it down into fitness, defense, and offense. But it's a couple like initial ways to think about things. The more involved version of this is in the reference section up in the top right. So if you go to doctrine, for example, and you come down to the table of doctrinal principles, you can do like a self-evaluation of your organization about how well or not well you're doing with specific principles in Wardley's doctrine. Now it's Wardley's doctrine, right? It's not the world's like perfect versions of how to be, but like these are the oughts, the moral kind of like, assertions of what you ought to be doing from Wardley that come along with the techniques. And it might be enlightening as you kind of like start to explore this a little bit. The other thing worth noting in particular is the climate patterns and the leadership stuff. This is where you get into being able to understand how to anticipate patterns in the market that are like, you can more or less understand when things are going to happen. Or like, I should say, you learn to anticipate them, even if you can't predict the moment they will happen, you learn to be ready for them. And I think that's a really important thing to be able to do. There's a whole table of like 61 different stratagems or methods of gameplay that once you've learned the basics, you can start to learn how to apply them on the map. Most organizations need to just like get themselves fit and get themselves in a place where they're not like hurting themselves with the actions that they're taking every day by like diffusing focus, like doing too many conflicting things. Most organizations will get most of the benefit out of just like having a strategy at all, which a map can facilitate. But if you start playing in the market side of this thing, or if you're working with startups, and this is kind of an interesting thing, when you're dealing more with like not what has already been built, but what could be built, before you have all that legacy to deal with, these plays can start to be an interesting kind of focal point for conversations. For example, do we want to accelerate the evolution of something by open sourcing it? Or do we want to decelerate it by getting a patent and making it so that nobody else can do the same thing, right? Some of these plays are more evil than others. Some of them are more accessible and easier to do than others. But the idea is you can go and learn about them and then integrate that into your understanding of what the dynamics are in the map itself. What gets me excited is the thinking that happens around the map, not really the map itself. Well, modeling things is fun too.
Shrikant mentioned about so what I think sounds like a seminar to me, a weekly seminar kind of a thing. How might one, get to be a part of one of those?
Yeah, totally. So on the learnwardleymapping.com site, there's a space for events. You can also go to, I'll just type the link in here, lwm.events. And this will pull open any events that are coming up that we're running. Next week's open session, unfortunately, I had to cancel because of a client engagement, but the following week we'll have one. So if you click, even though it says September 2nd on that open session, if you click on that, it'll take you to a page where you can register for the recurring meetings that are happening every week. And it's usually a small group. I don't tend to promote these things too widely because I like having a small group dynamic of just people like asking questions and stuff.
And different people end up coming different. So there are some people who come every week stably, and there are new participants who come in and go.
Yeah,
it's nice to see different problems being discussed, right? Again, the idea is when you see the patterns, the more patterns you're exposed to, then it becomes natural when you apply it at work. It's all contextual, right? So experiences, knowledge is absolute. You can't imagine something yet that you're not exposed to.
That's amazing. That's an amazing, profound saying, Shrikant.
I'm glad to be here when he said it.
It's all borrowed from a lot of authors, I can tell you that. But.
Yeah.
So the final thing I'll mention, if you want to learn more about this, so learnwardleymapping.com is a great resource. There's also a link to the book. There's a free book you can read it's quite a hunk of material. So there's a link to the book on learnwardleymapping.com. Simon wrote it. It's on Medium. You can just pick it up and sort of browse a couple chapters at a time. Obviously, if this isn't valuable to you, don't feel like you have to use it. It is an analytically biased method. But if you saw
all methods are biased in one way or other.
Yeah, totally. And I love Knevin, and I love this method. I love Jabe's ideal present stuff. Like, there's all sorts of like really fun ways to view the world and make sense of it better. As long as we change our behavior at the end of it, it's a useful thing to do, right? As long as we see something that we didn't see before and then change our behavior to take a new intent and a new pursuit of a greater future that we want to bring about, changing behavior is so integral to this. So please, if you find this useful, just give it a shot. And if you need any support or need help or answering questions or anything, come to the open space, or I'll just type my email in here as well, ben@hiredthought.com. I'd be more than happy to help you out. So thank you for being
Thank
here.
you so much, Ben.
And I'll send out these links to all of you in a formal email. I also found Simon Wardley's book in MP3 form, which somebody had transcribed.
Nice.
So I have struggles reading. So for me, downloading the MP3 and listening to it as an audiobook speeded up the process, and is available free. So I'll point you to those resources as well. So
Nice.
for those who want to figure out how to read it.
Awesome.
And so thank you, Ben. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's lovely
Thanks for
having
having
you.
me. It was nice to meet you all.
And Ben has got other more deeper topics. I've been telling him we'll bring him back again in 3 months or so and dive more deeper.
One of those. Just give us a quick review.
Oh man, what did I say, Srikanth? I don't even remember. I'm looking at my email now.
I can pull up his mail. I can give you some just quick gist of what we were discussing. He had modeling the everyday, making sense and making decisions. Then we discussed obliquity and implication, a new old approach to strategy. And one more is intentional organization, the art of doing things together on purpose. So again, these are applications of Wardley maps in different contexts. So these are some of them. In fact, he's doing, you're doing a course as well, right, with Jabe Bloom next week in the European time frame. Jabe is a good friend of mine. He's part of the Cognitive Edge Network. We practice Cynefin together. So Ben is co-teaching. What is that in the what domain is it?
There's a DDD EU thing that's coming up in October.
Yes.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about kind of how to create like equitable systems and how when systems become too big to understand or fit within our heads, they become kind of like unjust by default because they cannot be understood. It's kind of an interesting, like weird thing to explore. So yeah, we're excited about it.
It's a domain-driven development. Is that what it is?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
That's a paid course though, so it's not a free offering. It's a multi-day course, but Ben and Jabe are doing that.
If I was clever, I'd have the link ready.
Yeah, man. Where would I find more information about that, Ben?
Just Google domain-driven development, Jabe Bloom, Ben Mosior, it'll come up.
Yeah, okay.
I did find the link. So there it is. Yeah, training.dddeurope.com. And there's just look for the Wardley mapping thing. Cool. Well, thanks so much for having me, Srikanth. And it was really nice to meet you all. Thanks for
Our pleasure, Ben.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Bye,
have a
guys.
good night, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Srikanth.